Welcome to the program. I'm Felicity Ezuike. Glad you could join us. What does it mean to be African? 42 years since the commemoration of Africa Day began. Why is pushing reparations and historical redress within AU frameworks for peacekeeping and development still a theme 62 years on? These questions are important, and we will try to find some answers in a bit. But first, it is also important to establish that this day holds significant importance for Africans as it commemorates the founding of what is now known as the African Union, AU, to promote unity and solidarity among African nations towards achieving the Africa we want, as enshrined in the Africa Agenda 2063. It is also a day to reflect on the continent's achievements and to address ongoing challenges. Talking of challenges, one of the biggest facing the continent, apart from historical injustices, including transatlantic slave trade, colonialism, and the ongoing legacies of exploitation, is energy poverty and climate injustice. 62 years after, we are still grappling with the challenges of poverty, inequality, debt, as well as empowering the youth and women. Again, the question, what does it really mean to be African today, 62 years after the African Union was created? To navigate the complexities of globalization and ensure that our interests are represented. For some perspective, to help us answer some of these questions and the many issues around celebrating Africa Day, I'm joined by two distinguished gentlemen. From Wits University is Patrick Kadima. He's a lecturer there. He's joining us from South Africa. We also have Dr. Abubakar Ba. He is Presidential Research Professor of Sociology, Northern Illinois University from the US. It's a pleasure to welcome you both to the conversation today. Let's begin with you, Prof, and just establish, what does it mean to be African? 62 years since the commemoration of the Africa Day beginning.
Certainly, it's it's a time to reflect for all of us. I hope that what it means to be an African will be what we define and think is what an African. But I realize that that reality goes beyond what we may also think or what we have control over. But I think fundamentally, really, I think each time we come to these, points of commemoration or, historical marks, I think certainly it's a moment to think about the past or the critical moments that defines our realities. But I think more importantly is to truly think about where do we go from here in light of the challenges that we have and in light of the realities within but also beyond Africa. So to put it very simply, what it really means to be an African, I think that's a question that we should be will define. Not just to be defined by the past histories. Certainly we are not colonized people, we are not slaves, we are not those sort of things, irrespective of inequalities. So I would say what it means to be an African is to have a vision that is bold, that on the one hand recognizes the challenges, and also number two, honest in terms of addressing those challenges and looking forward.
Patrick, I'm still going to ask you the same question, but from another perspective. We'll walk down memory lane at this time and just ask, from what historical prism do you see this day, and how has its significance evolved over time?
Thank you. We, given the historical, journey that the continent comes from, of colonialism and apartheid, this day signifies, a day where Africans should celebrate their unity where Africans should look towards, achieving unity in the continent, collaboration, fostering, peace on the continent, and unfortunately, that has not been the case. And over the years, we have seen that, the celebration has become more of, just trying to, tick box the day, So, for historically, it is, Africa Day calls for Africans to remember how far the continent has come from and where it is now and where it is going. But, if you analyze it in the context of present case, is it a day that millions of Africans can celebrate really? Or is it just a day where, the elite, the privileged celebrate it, while millions of Africans continue to go to bed hungry? Millions of Africans are exposed to conflict. Millions of Africans do not have access to water and electricity. So what is the significance of this day?
Patrick, I'll come to you, Doc, in a bit, but let me bring in our third guest for this conversation. That's Cyprian Edward-Ekpo. He is the Director General, Institute of Law Research and Development of the United Nations. He joins us from Washington, D.C. A pleasure to welcome you to the program. I'm just going to start off by putting you on the spot and asking, what does it mean to you to be African today, considering we've had 62 years prepping for unity and growing our continent?
Thank you. Welcome. Thank you for the question, and God bless you. Being African is a pride, and the complexity and the promise and the coming away, that we are not just special, that we are part of humanity, and we are not different from any other pigmentation or racial group in the world, because today we have come to realize that in those days, when we were kids, we think as the Western world was so special from Africa. We come to realize that the Almighty God created everyone, all class of humanity, and give them the level of elevation in the system of humanity. And there is a mix of celebration and challenge. And going to our story, and that's the area we see have to work towards in the area of development. And we have a problem in Africa that is drawing us back, which African society has seen has been predominantly anti-intellectual. That's the area we have to work towards to really, really make a difference, stand out greater and greater than we are today.
There are so many areas we need to work on as a continent. Some say we're still a work in progress. 62 years seems to be young, considering how far we've come. But let's talk about the body that gave us this day to remind us of who we are, the AU. The body is now 62 years old. My question is to you, Dr. Bakarr. Has the body served its purpose? What side of the divide are you on its continued relevance today? Because on this platform, we've talked about the AU and if it is doing well enough to continue to exist as it is currently constituted.
Well, I think it has served a purpose. I'm not too sure what it's all the purposes, and it is still relevant. And I think one has to ask the question like this: what happens in the absence of an AU? I think it's very tempting to actually see all the failures of the AU as an organization, and certainly there's a lot. Also to think of the lack of achievements, so to speak, and in the way we want. But I think Africa cannot really afford to not have something like an AU or the AU. And I say that because you have to think of the components. I mean, a body that is an overarching body, such as the AU, can only really be strong in as much as its members or its constituents are strong or functional or capable. So when you begin to go through each of the member countries in Africa and you begin to see their challenges, their problems, that's actually a very good indication of actually why the AU is also, facing these significant challenges. So I think the question really is not so much whether we should have an AU, but I guess in what ways can the AU actually be a better body? And I think the purpose of the AU has evolved. As you know, I mean, back in the days when the Organization of African Unity was formed, at the dawn of colonialism and the Cold War, it was really mostly an advocacy body for, for championing African sovereignty, or I guess, to continue to affirm the independence that African countries gained. And of course, I mean, African countries were vulnerable and are still vulnerable. So in that sense, it was an advocacy organization, a moral organization, kind of like a political body that is largely there to talk and remind people of past injustice and so forth. Now, the AU, of course, has evolved. I mean, the organization has evolved, especially with the formation of the transformation to an AU. And then, I mean, you see the AU taking on much more bigger, mandates or ambitions from being both a peace fostering and maintaining body, and also kind of like a body that is supposed to direct or steer African development. So that's a very huge mandate. But back to the question.
I think what is the purpose, it's clear. At the heart of it is uniting and developing the continent. But there is a part to that question that you didn't take on. But I'll move it to Patrick to give him talk time as well and hear his thoughts. As the AU is now, there's a lot of complaints about, how it is carrying out its responsibility. Are you for the school of thought that there is some restructuring and reorganization required, especially now that we have a new chairperson? Do you think that changes are needed to reframe the AU to better carry out its responsibility?
Definitely. To be honest, the African Union in its state has failed, and it has failed dismally. We cannot have a regional organization, no matter what no matter how we try to defend it. A regional organization that has failed to instill peace on the continent, and a regional organization that has been very clueless on how to implement the African Continental Free Trade Area. It's a pity that 5 years on, that this African Continental Free Trade Area has not been implemented fully. What is the reason behind that? It cannot be difficult that if a region wants to trade amongst each other, it is very difficult to implement that. So it speaks to the institution on its own that it needs reforms. It speaks to that the institution needs reforms. It speaks also to the fact that there needs to be some restructuring that happens in certain areas of the African Union, because currently as it is now, the free movement of people around the continent is a project that I think has already failed, and we should accept that. It cannot be that, for example, European countries are making a lot of money through visa rejections from Africans, but Africans are failing, to respond through through one voice in terms of also reciprocating that issue of visas to global north countries. So I just think that there is a lot that is going on in the African Union, and that one of the solutions needs to be looked at, and to look at the restructuring of the organization. Its peacekeeping force mandate is non-existent. It has largely left the role of peacekeeping to sub-regional organizations such as SADC, ECOWAS, and so on and so forth. You know, when we speak of the African Union, we need to, you know, have a body that is similar to that of the European Union, that, you know, its voice is able to, you know, be heard, you know, not only at home, but also abroad. But this has not been the case. You know, we have had different...
Patrick, sorry to interject. Please don't lose your train of thought. You're free to go back to it, but I needed to interject to ask you to expand on the conversation about peacekeeping and the AU seeming to sublet its responsibility to sub-regional bodies. Isn't that, you know, amplifying the argument that the AU might have outlived its relevance and perhaps should be replaced by these sub-regional bodies that seem to be doing a lot better when it comes to, you know, peace, security, and conflict resolution?
No, I don't think so. I'm not saying the AU must be replaced at all, because sub-regional organizations are taking on the tasks of peace and instilling peace in the continent. No, not absolutely. That's a very dangerous path, I think. If we do that, you know, if we seek unity on the continent, then we need to have a body such as the African Union. But what I'm saying is that the reforms need to be done. The African Union needs to be a body that is able to command respect and command not. And for instance, let me give you an example. The conflict between the Democratic Republic of Congo and the M23 rebels that included also Rwanda Beckett. The AU was silent many times in that aspect. You know, it had to be SADC and ECOWAS taking the lead. And this should not be the case when you have a regional organization such as the African Union. Yes, we allow for sub-regional organizations to be there. I'm not saying abolish them, but what I'm saying is that the African Union should be the principal organ undertaking these peace talks, that should be undertaking these negotiations to ensure that there is stability. But you find that its absence has now opened a vacuum where you have people from Qatar, leaders from Qatar, trying to instill now peace and trying to mediate a conflict that does not even involve them. You have people in America trying to also get involved in the conflict, mediation of conflict that does not involve them. It's because the African Union has been, by and large, silent on these issues, and therefore regional organizations have tried, and therefore people have seen the opportunity to come and fill that gap.
I think the heart of your submission has become clearer now. Let's ask Cyprian this, a body that commands respect. I'm just jumping off what Patrick said. Talk to us about this new leadership. It's been 3 months since the former Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation of the Republic of Djibouti became the chairperson of the AU. I wanted us to talk a bit about AU before we talk about the theme for this year about Africa Day, because at the heart of the conversation, again, like I said, is the body that was established 62 years ago. So give us your perspective, your view on the leadership that we currently have at the helm of affairs and the possibilities that it can implement some of the changes that have been advocated over time.
All right, thank you. Before I talk about the chair of the African Union, I think I picked something from Mr. Patrick that's very, very essential that I should also mention. The AU hasn't been perfect. It's far from it, but it's essential that it has helped shape norms and some mandates, terms of conflict resolutions. It might not be perfect, of course, it's not. It has shaped some norms. And then, just like Mr. Patrick said, that we shouldn't think about scrapping AU in any way, in any form. Even other regional organizations in the Western world are also perfect. They have their challenges. So, but we have 3 kind of systems, I believe, should be institutionalized to help the AU. First, the African Union, the African continent does not have a supranational law enforcement mechanism or an enforceable supranational law system. That needs to be institutionalized. Even the African laws like the African Charter on Human and People's Rights and the African Union Charter, you find it difficult to make it or see it being applicable in some jurisdiction in African countries. judgments have been delivered by ECOWAS court, have been delivered by African Union court, they are not enforceable. And they are not, so the mechanism for enforceable supranational law should be created. That is the first thing I think. The second aspect is that we need to orientate our people, the African people, especially the folks of the younger generation folks, about aspiration and the greater attaching value to the knowledge system. For example, the folks of the younger generation folks, they don't read. And if you don't read, I don't see how you can advance, because they are the future leaders. They take over the African Union in time to come. So how do they hope to structure it for a betterment of the life of the citizenry of the Africa if they don't read? So that's the issue. So I think I'm missing one point I needed to mention. So let me go to the point of the chair of the African Union. So far, let me say it's still so early that Mr. Mahmoud brings serious, he has brought serious diplomatic weight to Africa. I think I observe it from distance, and he knows how to navigate complex political waters. And I think we just have to hope.
Cyprian, I'm trying to get your attention, Cyprian. I'm trying to get your attention. We're about 24 minutes into the conversation. What you said is it's still early days to be making any sort of judgment. But I also want to quickly, I was trying to also say this while you were speaking, that when you say young people don't read, it is a generalization that can be argued that it might not be fair to what the young people are doing today to just use the blanket statement that young people do not read. You know, I don't know if you want to respond to that very briefly, and then I will go to Dr. Bakarr.
If you are an author of books, and you have a relationship with the publishing companies, they will verify this they will give you this verification that Africans don't face, the young people in Africa don't face the knowledge system and in reading. They are much attached to social media system than reading, and that's a great problem, and that needs to be addressed. African Union can do that by a system of creating a system of orientation, because you can't go far without knowledge. When a society is anti-intellectual, it can never.
All right, Cyprian, there was a time, though, that they said if you want to hide things from people, just put it in a book. We're hoping that that would change. Let's circle back to the theme of Africa Day this year. We know that the body, AU, has been a vocal proponent of reparation. Just for clarity, the theme for this year is justice for Africans and people of African descent through reparation. So that's where I'm going with this. Dr. Bakarr, there are proponents of reparation arguing that former colonial powers and nations that profited from the transatlantic slave trade have a moral and ethical responsibility to compensate for the lasting damages that was caused. I want you to just talk to us about this quest for reparation that has become the theme for this year's celebration. How can that, in truth, address historical injustice faced by Africans and people of African descent?
And these are really all related questions, about the AU. It's ultimately really, I think, this is about power relations. This is about leverage. And I don't want to be the person who kind of put cold water on the idea of reparations and so forth. But I think it's important really to ask, who is asking for reparations and for what, and so forth. So, the historical injustices that we talk about, for Africans writ large, those are still continuing. And I think it's important really to make a distinction between symbolic acts of reparations and actually what you can really achieve in terms of improving the conditions of people, or, reducing or ending the systems of oppression. So I think from a symbolic standpoint, of course, I mean, any act to pay a damage will be a much more forceful way of recognizing that an injustice has been done before. But no payment really will actually compensate, Africans or Black people, for the damage that has been done. I think to me the more important question really is how can we actually, end the ongoing, damages that are going on. In a sense, I mean, to talk of reparation assumes that actually we are finished with the damages, but actually we haven't. The sense of the systems of injustice still continues. So I think, I know we had a discussion on the AU, but essentially the more fundamental question really here is how can we actually change our condition? How can we actually create leverage? Because if we create leverage, if we change our conditions, we can actually, enhance our bargaining positions vis-a-vis others. We can improve our conditions. So I think from a material standpoint, I'm much more concerned really about, creating much more fair, much more just systems for us going forward than actually just the symbolic act of, a token payment of a damage that has been done before, which just continues anyway.
Dr. Ba, there are people who will fight you over that, that reparation shouldn't be at the heart. But you did ask a question, who is asking for reparation? That's a question, because determining the exact amount, knowing who is going to spearhead this conversation and those other issues remain, a source of conflict. I'll ask those questions when we come back from this very short break. Gentlemen, do stay with us. Glad you're still with us. We're still looking at Africa Day and the theme that we are looking for justice. Let me see if I can get it. Africa Day 2025, justice for Africans and people of African descent through reparations. We've talked about the AU as a body because it was 62 years ago that this body was created, and one of the purposes was to unify the continent and improve our lot as a people. I still have as guest Patrick Kadima. He's a lecturer at Wits University. Dr. Bakarr is Presidential Research Professor of Sociology, Northern Illinois University, and also joining in is Cyprian Edward-Ekpo, Director General, Institute of Law Research and Development of United Nations. He joins us from Washington, D.C. Before we went on that break, Dr. Ba expressed his thoughts about who is asking for reparation. I come to you, Patrick, with this. Determining the exact amount of reparation is challenging. There's estimates ranging from 100 to 131 trillion dollars for the transatlantic slave trade alone. And then you have more, over 700 trillion proposed by the African World Reparations and Repatriation Truth Commission. There's also no agreement as to who should receive the reparation. Is it states, is it communities, or descendants? How does this impact the entire purpose? Do you align with the skepticism expressed by Dr. Ba? The
good doc, he spoke about, having, concentrating on current, justice systems and so on and so forth. But, as a lawyer, and I'm going to tell you this, and having worked with the issue of reparations here in South Africa, which we are still working on and which my former colleagues are still working on, with civil society, it is a very, 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 important issue. Apartheid, for example, here in South Africa had immense repercussions for a lot of families and, family members of the victims and so on and so forth. Until today, some of the perpetrators that did not go through the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, who did not go and testify, for their actions that they did during apartheid, have been roaming around. And therefore, the danger is that if we do not solve the impunity of that time, if we do not solve the issues of that time, we risk having a situation where impunity continues, in certain areas of society. And therefore it is very important, because some of these family victims, were children at the time when their parents were killed by agents working for the apartheid state. And therefore it is important that reparations takes place. And now we see the president has decided not to oppose the legal action from the families or the victims, and he has decided to even open a commission of inquiry. So it is really important that reparations are done, because this solves the issue, of what is it, peace before justice, and justice needs to be there before peace is there. So in the bigger context of the African continent, it is also important that reparations are done. I'm a firm believer that reparations should be given to the communities that suffered from this horrible and horrendous crime. Because if we do not deal with the issues of reparations, we risk then letting our history, go unattended. We risk the trauma that continues to traumatize, and whether we want to accept it or not, these colonial era crimes that were done, for example, in Belgian Congo, still affects the community, still affects the country till today. And therefore reparations are assigned to say, look, we are sorry for this crimes that we did.
I'm staying with you because, Patrick, I'm staying with you because you seem to be an advocate for, the need for reparation. But let's talk about the fact that former colonial powers often argue that the actions were not illegal under international law at the time. And analysts are saying this makes it somewhat difficult to establish legal accountability. Also, we know that there is resistance from other far right political movement. So does these not put a clog on the wheel? Doesn't it make this quest for reparation futile?
No, it doesn't. It's just a useless argument, if I may put it in that way. It's a useless legal argument by saying that because it was not legal at the time because of international law, there is no basis for reparations. It's just like saying that apartheid was legal during that time, and therefore there is no basis for people to have reparations, families and victims to have reparations. It's a lazy argument, that is voiced on by certain quarters, especially the far right, like you have said. And what my point of view is that we need to be able to accept that sometimes we need to have diplomatic channels where these things are addressed. The legal argument that it was not legal at that time, it was not banned by international law, does not hold water. These people were hurt, and sometimes there is a famous saying that says sometimes laws are used, sometimes laws are said to be legal, but in certain instances they are not, because the fact that apartheid was legal does not mean, for example, the fact that apartheid was legal does not mean that it was right. It's not justifiable. So I think that African countries need to mount a challenge for these reparation issues. But again, they will not do that. And I can guarantee you for the next 5 to 10 years, they will not do that because the institutional capacity of the AU is non-existent. There is no common framework on the issues of reparations. Civil societies are the ones who are pushing this by and large, with governments looking very far. So I don't think it's at the end of the day, it's just an academic discussion that we're having here. But I don't think in reality, in the next 5 to 10 years, even the next 20 years, I can put a bet on that.
It does go back to what you said earlier about having a body that commands respect in terms of the AU and its ability to, wield a certain influence to push for things that matter to the continent. Dr. Bakarr, let me come to you and ask. I know we should have other priorities, if I get you correctly. But if you were to speak on the issue of reparation, what would be some of the potential forms that this could take that would make sense?
So I think you really have to understand the interstate relations. Oppressors don't go and give back. When countries, societies fight, you only really get the other person to pay when you become a winner, or when you win, or when you conquer them, or somehow when you have leverage. So all of this discussion here, really, this is just a moral discussion, because from a practical standpoint, African countries do not have leverage. And because we do not have leverage, we don't have a way to force other people to pay. You have to force other people to pay, war damages and so forth. So to more directly to your question, I think really here, to me, what really is more important here is any form of reparation is about the symbolic recognition that a harm was done. It's almost like, in many West African countries, we give kola nuts. Kola nuts, it's often really not much benefits from a food standpoint, but of course it's a recognition. So I think any form of symbolic way of actually affirming, that a past was done. We can talk of development aid and all those things, but those are like quite different things. I mean, those don't really come. So I'm actually be looking more really at very simple things. Erection of museums, like serious museums, monuments, public recognitions, and those sort of things. To me, that is really what is realistic, but also that affirms the moral principle that a harm was done. I don't see how Western countries are going to take trillions of dollars and give it to African people.
But Bakarr, there's been some acknowledgement of responsibility. There's been some acknowledgement of responsibility in the atrocities that went down in the past. I'm sure you're aware of this. It was a long time before that verbal acknowledgement and apology was given to the people for some of the atrocities that was committed. Shouldn't that instigate some sort of, a hope that we will, if we continue to push, we will get what is rightful when it comes to what was done in the past?
I'll tell you this. So think of it like this, right? When somebody causes a crime, the law punishes them and maybe they put a fine. There's a way of enforcing that. There's a way of actually getting that to be done. The way that African countries can actually get something for past injustices is when they build capacity, when they build leverage, when they are actually able to force other people to say, okay, look, you have to do this. Until you build leverage, we are just at the level of a moral discourse. Now, I don't mean to undermine or to minimize moral discourse. It is important. We're all moral people. We shame people. But if you're really talking about actually getting something material, then that means really you have to be in a position to actually force other people to pay. If you are not in a position to force other people to pay, they will not. This is the sad reality of it.
I'm inclined to lean towards your argument, but the one thing that you cannot kill for people is hope that what is right, justice will really, truly be done. Cyprian, rather, I want to, do you have some thought? Oh, okay, I understand we lost Cyprian for a bit. Hopefully he can join us again. But let's shift a little and talk about Africa's potential for growth in terms of Africa-led initiatives asserting greater ownership of our own development parts. Reparation is subject on its own, but what about our part to growth? One thing we do have, and it took a long time for us to get it, that is the AFCFTA. We also have the Africa CDC, that's the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. These are two flagship initiatives that some argue that if fully realized can significantly boost intra-African trade and health security. I'll come to you, Patrick, with this question. How impressed are you with the inroads that the AFCFTA has been able to make, and What are your thoughts about how we can better harness its full potential for Africa's growth?
It needs political willingness, there's no political will with African leaders to ensure that the African continental free trade area works. There's a lack of infrastructure in Africa. There is, you cannot talk about free trade of goods and services when your roads are non-existent, in most African countries. You cannot speak about, free trade when countries are still holding with the free movement of people, because there is also an argument of what does the free movement of people mean, between sovereign states. It has been clear that free movement of people is not where somebody just wakes up today from Namibia and walks into South Africa without any documentation. That's not what we're saying, free movement of people. But we are saying about the free movement of people that Africans should be able to move across their continent at ease. And like a European who will come from, the global north and come into Africa and pass easily through all the 52 countries, 54 countries without being asked for a visa. But you as an African, you have the challenges of passing from Namibia to South Africa to Zambia. So those are some of the challenges that need to be addressed that I don't think will be addressed because there is a lack of political will. And the other thing is that, you talk of the Africa CDC, Center for Disease Control, as a flagship initiative or institution. But one can pose the question and say, what's the relevance of the Center for Disease Control, with all its powers, when it does not have the financial muscle to deal with such issues? The African Union, those flagship projects that you speak about, mainly rely on external donors to give financial muscle to these African Union institutions for them to function. And the other question is, do you accept that? Would one accept that when a donor gives you a certain amount of money to facilitate your organization, it will not be free? It will not be free. So I think, despite us welcoming these initiatives, these flagship initiatives, we should ask the true questions. Does it have the finances to run? We are in an era of pandemics. We are in an era of communicable diseases. And is the CDC able to be up to the task? I don't think so. If countries such as South Africa are still struggling with, that are developed, that are still struggling with ensuring that they have a strong public health system, then I don't think that, there is much left on the African continent for us to salvage in terms of that. So there needs to be political will, both domestically and regionally, and that is lacking within our leaders.
I'll come to you, Dr. Bakarr, in a bit. I understand we have Cyprian Edward-Ekpo back, so I want to hear his thought on the issue of reparations. I mean, you had the submission from Patrick and Dr. Bakarr. What side of the divide are you on?
Yeah, on the issue of reparation, I really, my sincere apologies. I think I missed a lot from Dr. Abbas and Patrick, brilliant presentation. Reparation, in my belief, it shouldn't be acute. It's a global responsibility. And it shouldn't be acute. And we shouldn't focus on the complexity of the situation. Just like Mr. Patrick mentioned, the issues of the apartheid was law. I'm hearing that for the first time. I didn't know why apartheid could have been a law, because I understand when a law is repugnant to natural justice, it's not a law in the first place. And if it's later discovered that it was a law, that means it wasn't a law even in the restrictive sense. So there shouldn't be that shouldn't be an excuse to counter reparation. But I also believe very strongly reparation. I don't know about much about the Southern and Eastern African leadership system. Reparation might be difficult in Africa when you consider the penchant for corruption. So when you look at that, how do you channel it And if we are able to cause people who are responsible to channel the reparations deliverables. So I think we should be looking for a way we cause the global system, let me call it global system that has been responsible for this, to make this reparation in terms of transfer of knowledge system and technology to Africa, where everyone can become the beneficiary. So that might be possible. But we also have the challenge of enforcement. Most of our international laws are in a soft law status. They are not enforceable. So how do you come about being able to configure a system where the laws and the rights contained in international laws can be enforced? Because those laws are there in international law. The laws for reparations are there in the international covenant.
Apologies for interjecting. We're really time pressed. We have less than 5 minutes. So I just wanted I asked you a question to bring you up to speed. I mean, to get your thoughts and bring you up to speed. Carry along in the conversation. Where we are at now, we're talking about Africa-led initiative in terms of asserting greater ownership of our own development parts. I do not know if you listened to Patrick's submission about the Africa Continental Free Trade Area and the Africa CDC, but what are your thoughts about Africa-led initiatives in terms of asserting greater control of our development part?
I didn't listen to Patrick because my system got disconnected.
So, do you have thoughts on some African-led ownership, development part that will improve our lot instead of waiting always for handouts? Something that came out of Africa is the Africa Continental Free Trade Area and the Africa CDC. That was two things I picked up and presented. So, what are your thoughts about Africa-led initiative for our own growth?
I think those instruments are not strong enough to help Africa to recover. I don't think they're strong enough. And that's why when I started, I mentioned that we have a problem of not having an African continental supranational law system. That's what we need. And if you look at the African Continental Free Trade Areas agreements and the CDCs and all that, they'll have a lot of loopholes that, when evaluated, I don't think we have there yet in terms of recovery toward development. That's my personal opinion. So we need well formidable and sustainable legal system or legal framework to be configured for Africa to recover. That's my personal opinion.
Dr. Bakarr, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so I think, all of this discussion, I think there's a couple of things that are kind of like going on, I think we need to understand. So we have two trends here. One is the components of the African Union or African countries, the individual countries. And number two is the body, the Pan-African body. And what you see really here is that when you have weak components, when you have countries that in themselves they lack capacity, they have political problems, in a sense, you will not really get a Pan-African body or Pan-African systems that are actually very, very good. It's a kind of like a chicken and egg kind of thing. So the question is, okay, well, how does actually improved Pan-African mechanisms, institutions, leadership help African countries? But also you should know that you can only get that if the countries themselves actually are strong enough. Now, if you look historically, if you look at places where regions of the world where things have actually moved, people have developed, typically what happens is that you will get one or two countries that actually kind of like break through with technology, with development, with governance.
We have just 30 seconds left, so please, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so those countries actually becomes like engine that actually help propel others. But in the case of African countries, what we have is that there's hardly any African country that really have serious capacity. And I think this is really the problem that we're dealing with. And at the core of it for me is a political governance problems. That's really what we need to fix first and foremost before most other things. Thank you.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for giving us your time. It's never enough when you're talking about issues like this, but we do appreciate the insight that you have provided. Patrick, Kadima, Dr. Bakarr, and Cyprian Edward-Ekpo, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. And that's our program today. Thank you for spending your time with us. Do share your thoughts, feedbacks on topics discussed here. You can connect with us on all our social media platforms at News Central TV. Personally, you can find me at Felicity_E on Twitter and all social media platforms at Felicity Ezewike. Until next time, please be well.